Andy Robinson. We're really excited to have you for the second time speak to the Got Your Six Network and share your expertise. Andy comes to us with over 40 years of expertise in fundraising and has provided support for thousands of nonprofits across the United States and Canada. We're so lucky to have him share his wisdom with us. And without further ado, I know we need to get to our content here. Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Dee. Let me thank Deirdre, let me thank Rhiannon, let me thank Hunter, let me thank their colleague Meg, and all the folks at the Bob Woodruff Foundation who are standing this up so that we can all be here today. So thank you for your expertise and your compassion and your thoughtfulness in doing this work. It is appreciated. A couple of ground rules here. The first ground rule is I'm taking questions as best we can throughout. And colleagues at the Woodruff Foundation will be kind of paying attention to chat, and periodically I'll pause and I'll say, what sort of questions are you getting? What are you hearing? So we'll do some Q&A at the end too, but I don't think you have to hold your questions, and we'll try and address them as we go. Furthermore, if we don't get your questions answered, my contact is at the end of the slide deck. I'll also put my email up in chat. If you want to email me at some point in the future to get some questions answered that we couldn't address here, I'm happy to help you. There's no charge for that. It's not a big deal. So feel free to reach out. If I can't address your questions today, I'll try and do them in the future. And then if you want to stay in touch with me, I do have my own email list, and we don't all harvest these email addresses without your permission. But if you want to stay in touch, the way to do it is to put your email in chat. And then Rhiannon will collect those later and get them to me. So that's opt-in. If you're into it, I'd love to stay in touch with you. And if you're already getting too many emails from too many other people, I totally respect that. And you may not hear from me, and that's okay. So let's go to the next slide, please. I would love to know why you're here, why this topic is meaningful, why you care about this. We're taking an hour of your life to teach you about fundraising. Why do you want to learn this topic? So chat is your friend here. Pop it in chat and talk a little bit about why you think this is necessary. And Deirdre, I'm going to have you unmute because I have a question for you while they're popping in. I mean, you hired me, you asked for this content, right? What are you hearing from the crew? Like, why is this important to groups?
You know, we hear again and again, and local partners, many of you wrote in the local partner self-assessment tool that we conducted. The pandemic has been a challenging time, and, seeking those new and creative ways to approach fundraising when financial situations are particularly acute. Cool. And Andy, I remember in your last session, you talking about storytelling, and I'm really excited to build on that knowledge and hear more about that.
All right, we're going there in just a minute, so that's awesome. I'm getting good stuff in chat here. I mean, Trish makes an interesting point and says more money equals more impact. And I think that's reasonable. I think that's appropriate. I also have to say, and we're going to get into the case and sort of what you're asking for and why you're asking. In some ways, you have to demonstrate your impact to get the money. So it's sort of this circular thing. If you get more money, you can have more impact. But it's a precondition in some ways to having that money come your way. So it's a both and. Love this. There's always something new to learn. Hard right now. Yeah, I feel that. New nonprofit, much to learn. Welcome. Congratulations for your new group. A new board member. We got a board member in the house. Thank you, Travis. Love having board members here. So this is great. So Ron says games are won and lost by the fundamentals. I don't know if this is a game, but I take the point. I will say this. Dee said, like, what's new and exciting in fundraising? And that's a fair question. And my response is always, are you doing the basic boring stuff well? And before you master the new creative exciting, which is awesome, there's some basic things you need to know to be effective, regardless of what tools you're using. So that's where we're going today. Next slide, please. So what we're going to cover, we're going to talk a little bit about the case, and this is fundraising language, and it simply means where is the money going and what impact is it going to have? What's going to happen with it? What are you raising the money for? We're going to spend some time on income options. There's a lot of different ways to generate revenue for nonprofit organizations. We're going to touch a little bit on I think, all of them. I want to redefine the word fundraising. It is not about money. It's about people. It's about relationships. It's about how we integrate and treat people. And so we're going to spend some time thinking about that. And there's going to be some homework around that as well. And we'll talk a little bit about effectiveness and efficiency. Now, in case you didn't know, this is session 1 in a 4-part series that's going to take place over the next 6 or 7 weeks. And so there's going to be some stuff you're going to ask. I suspect that's going to show up in the content for a future session, in which case I might just say, come back in 2 weeks. So the schedule is posted on one of these slides. I think towards the end, we've got the list of all the dates and all the topics. So we'll get there in a minute, but be aware that this is the first bite at a fairly large apple. Next slide. So this is a place where I'm going to get you to help. And if you've got something to write with, that's excellent, though you can also just type stuff into chat. And we're going to work through these 4 questions in a row. What I'm helping you build here is the case for your work, the idea of what you do, why it's valuable, why people should care. And I've tried to knock it down to 4 fairly simple questions. So we're going to take them one at a time, and we're going to fill chat. And I'm actually going to pick on some of my colleagues at the Bob Woodruff Foundation to actually fill a little bit while you're doing this. So mic's off, people, because here it's coming. The first question for all of you is, when you think about your group and the work that your group does, what are you proud of? Think about the work, think about the impact, and pull up chat and write something in there that describes why you're proud of the work of your organization. Go ahead and do that. We'll that's for everyone to read, and we'll pull a few out and read. While chat is coming in, Dee, I'm going to start with you because I know you've been there a while. What do you, when you think about the foundation, what's one thing that makes you proud?
It's really hard to think of just one thing, Andy. But I think right before the session, we were talking about how we just added a new local partner in Connecticut. And that means we're now across 46 different states. So I think just the network of support across the country.
Nice. Seeing some excellent stuff here in chat. So this is lovely. And again, feel free to sort of follow along as these things come in. This is a conversation. It's not a monologue. So we can have the conversation verbally, and we can also have it in chat, which I love. So, oh, nice. Something about helping vets have babies. That's powerful. In honor of my dad, always good. You know, if you can honor the legacy of family members, that's powerful stuff too. So these are good things. I like what I'm seeing here. So I'm going to keep this moving in the interest of getting through everything. Feel free to backfill. I keep bringing this stuff in. And if we move to the next question and you're still working on the first question, it's totally fine. The second question is, what makes your work unique? Like, what do you have? What do you do that nobody else has or does? And it could be geographically, like we're the only group in Northeast Ohio that does X, Y, or Z, and that's fine. Many of you are local groups, so you're working in a local catchment area. What do you do that makes your work unique, special, different? How do you distinguish yourself from other groups? So go ahead and pop that in there as well. Rhea, I'm going to call on you this time. Unmute. Hunter, you're next. I'm warning you. So what's one thing about Bob Woodruff Foundation that you think is unique?
I think that it's the marriage between the innovation and the forward-looking nature of the work and the responsiveness to what's happening in the moment. It's not just about taking care of the veterans today, it's about taking care of veterans of tomorrow. Nice.
That was good. That was very articulate and concise. So I'll give you points for that. Today plus tomorrow equals us. Nice. Also getting some good stuff in chat here. Excellent. Some of you are still working on the first question, which is fine. And in some cases, it's the same answer, which is also interesting. Yeah, all of our outcomes are measured. Outcomes and outputs are measured in research. Thank you, Sally. That's good. Oh, nice. We help vets from everywhere. So we actually, we have a geographic location, but we don't limit ourselves to that geographic location. So that's pretty interesting. Anyone else, if you take a moment, think about this, anything else you want to add in here that separates your work from other groups? Now, one thing we can do, and Rhiannon and I will lean on you, we can save the chat log, right? We have the power to do that. So if you all would like, one of the things you'll get at the back end of this is we'll send you the slide deck and we can send you a printout of everything that comes up in chat here. And the point here is you can learn from each other, right? You may see something that was like, that's a great way to articulate that. I want to use that. And you can figure out ways to share this with each other, which would be great. All right, we're going to the third question. Who are your audiences? Who needs to know about your work? And I mean for any reason, for service delivery, for fundraising, for communications, for volunteerism, whatever. Like, who are the various audiences that need to know about what you do? And you don't get to say the general public, or you don't get to say everyone, because you really have to be a little more specific and targeted than that. So what I would ask you all to do in the chat is write down whatever audiences pop into your head. It could be 1, or it could be 5 or 8 or whatever. So when you think about your own organization, the work you do in your community, who needs to know about it? What constituencies or groups of people need to know? Hunter, I'm calling on you this time around, so please unmute if you're there. And I'd be curious to know who you think the audiences are for the Bob Woodruff Foundation.
Absolutely. So I am fairly new, so I'm still getting my bearings. But I think our audiences are those people in those organizations who are doing the boots on the ground work and who are really working and exemplifying the efforts for veterans across the country and really being able to demonstrate where those needs are and to support those needs that our veterans are experiencing.
I like it. So what's interesting about this is the audience is the people. The audience may not be the veterans themselves, it could be, but the audience is the people who serve the veterans and support them and strengthen them. And so we work, we work with the intermediaries. We work with the groups that then push the work out to the community. So I think that's very clear and specific. Getting more good stuff here in chat. I like this. And again, the more specific and tangible you can be, the stronger your pitch, the stronger your case. Now, here's the fourth question. It's my favorite, and certainly it's the one that Deirdre queued up. I want to know your favorite story or anecdote about the impact of your work. And we're not actually going to put this in chat. We're going to, in a minute here, we're going to put you in breakouts and we're going to pair you up with somebody, maybe someone you don't know. And, you can say, hi, my name is, don't take the time to tell your mission statement or all the things you do. What I want you to do is take the time to share a story about the impact of your organization. The story could be about you. The story could be about a veteran you serve. The story could be about some change in your community as a result of your work. The story could be about some historical thing that's still resonating in your community now. Go where you go, right? Most of us carry stories around with us. What we're going to do is we're going to pair you up, and you're going to have about 4 minutes to do this, which means each of you gets 2 minutes to tell your story. And we'll send you a prompt halfway through saying 2 minutes, time to switch. So if you're really talkative, you might let the other person go first. And the goal here is not to raise money, or the goal here is not to have some particular outcome. It's just to tell a story, to share something that's in your heart. And when we come back, we're going to break it down a little bit and talk about what makes a good story good. And at the risk of getting ahead of myself, I will say that all effective fundraising incorporates stories. We are storytellers, we are story collectors, we are story shapers. Somebody said to me once, statistics raise eyebrows, but emotions raise money. And I think that's super smart. So, you can bring out the data. You can serve, we served 150 families last year, which is awesome. You need that. Tell me about one of those families, right? Tell me what happened with that family as a result of your work. That's what lands this. So Rhea, are you ready for the breakouts? All right. So if you haven't, let me explain how this works if you haven't done it. you are going to get an invitation on your screen that says go to room 5 or room 12 or whatever it is. And when you go there, you hopefully are in a space with one other person. It's just the two of you. So you can introduce yourself very briefly and then say, I'll go first or you go first, and just share a story. We'll warn you halfway through and we're going to bring you back at about 4 minutes. Maybe we'll give you an extra minute if we're feeling generous. So I think the instructions are clear. Rock and roll, let's do this. Excellent, welcome back everybody. I hope you made a friend and heard something moving and interesting. Can we go to the next slide, please? I am curious from your perspective, based on this exercise and your lived experience as a human being, what makes a good story good? How do you know you're hearing a good one? How do you know you're telling a good one? I mean, I got a slide and I'll give you my take on this, but I would love for you to think about this and put stuff into chat. How do you know we have a good story? Jennifer goes with conflict. That's interesting. Not crazy. I think we are wired for stories. I think it's in our DNA. I think it's one of the things that distinguishes our species is that we are a storytelling, story distributing, story collecting species. And I think other species have their stories too, but ours are pretty ornate and interesting and complex. So the theory here is that when you tell a good story, you are ringing a bell somewhere deep inside of somebody. It resonates in a way that is primal, it's deep. And so the ability to master storytelling and also story collecting is central to fundraising and communications and recruitment and all of those things. So I love what I'm seeing in the chat. There's a lot of really good stuff. You guys are very sophisticated about this and I'm appreciative. Let me give you my summary. Next slide, please. Oops, go back. Thank you. As mentioned, I think one thing is the emotional impact, this whole thing about statistics raising eyebrows, but emotions raising money. Good stories are specific. They got details. You can feel it. You can smell it. You can taste it. And, there's a tendency to generalize, like, let me tell you about a kid and you describe the kid and that's okay. But, it might be better to say, let me tell you about Sally, or let me tell you about Jose, or let me tell you about Johnny. And change the name if you have to. But, Johnny's 9 years old. When Johnny walks into the room, he's this big, but you think he's this big because he has this big aura and he just takes up a lot of space. He's a big personality. And then I start to have a sense of who Johnny is. So specific beats generic every time. Now, classic one here is the story arc. It's this idea that somebody overcomes a barrier or a challenge and gets to a better place. And for many of your organizations, that's the central theme of the work you do. So this is multicultural. This is around the world. When we think about story shape, this is a classic shape of a story is you have somebody, the protagonist, the person, and they're here and they get to here. And that transformation is the thing that makes the story powerful. Good stories have unexpected things in them, a surprise. It doesn't have to be a trick ending, but there's some information or detail or something that's unexpected that surprises people. And, the last one I have here is relatable. You need to be able to see yourself or someone you know and love in the story. It has to resonate with you in a way like, I understand that. That feels real to me. So if we do nothing else today, and we still have some time to do many other things, but if we do nothing else, I really want you to think about what are the stories you're telling about your organization? How are you shaping those stories? And more importantly, what options are you giving for people to tell their own story? Because one of the myths about fundraising is it's a monologue, like I'm going to talk you into giving you money. And what fundraisers learn very quickly is it's a dialogue. And the more you can get the prospective donor to tell you their story and talk about themselves, the greater chance you have of getting the gift. And if you're the asker, if you're the solicitor, if you're the fundraiser and you're doing all the talking, you are going down in flames. But if you can get somebody to tell you their story and how they relate to your work, you're going to do really well. Next slide, please. So I want to give you a mental model to think about fundraising. There are 4 things you need to do this well. You need to have a case. Why people should care, why they give. We've been working on the case. That's what we've been doing for the last 15 minutes. You need prospective donors to ask. Now, they could be individuals, they could be businesses, they could be foundations, they could be government agencies, right? There's a lot of different ways to raise money, but you need potential donors. You need people to go out and engage with those donors. And you need systems. You have to send out thank you notes, right? You have to track the money. You need to be able to measure your impact, all that stuff. Here's what I've seen. Go to the next page. I have worked literally with thousands of organizations. Dia, I've got you beat. You're in 46 states. I've actually worked in 47 states. I've worked in Canada many times. I'm sort of coming to you from 30,000 feet in the air. Here's what I see. Most groups, they're doing good work. It's valuable. They can tell you why it's valuable. Check. I believe there are a lot more donors than you realize. I'm going to try and prove this to you shortly. Check. The systems can always be better. Many of us don't love our databases. Many of us could get those thank you letters out more promptly, all that stuff, but we muddle through, which means in many cases, the weakest link is that third one. There's not enough people engaging with donors. We have a shortage of askers. But this presents a conundrum. Let's go to the next slide. A lot of people don't want to be askers, right? This is the scary part of fundraising. It's like, I don't want to ask anybody for money. So I feel like if we're going to bring people in and make this accessible, we have to redefine the whole concept of fundraising. It is not about money. It's about people. It's about how we treat people. It's about how we show value for the work and how their story links up with our story as an organization. So next slide. Here's a concept that you will see in fundraising from the start. This is really fundraising 101, and it's a really good place to begin this conversation. There are many flavors of this in fundraising world. This one is called the cycle of fundraising. I like it because it's basic and intuitive and easy to understand. Generally, we would start at the lower left where it says identify prospects. We figure out who's a potential donor. Next step is we want to educate them about what we do, why it's valuable, and we want to cultivate them, which is a nice agricultural metaphor that basically means you're bringing them along. When they're ready, you ask. And we'll talk a little bit about readiness, but at some point you really do need to say, will you support this work? We need your help. Having asked them, you want to thank them and recognize them, make sure they feel appreciated for their gift. And then we are always looking for ways to involve our donors more deeply to strengthen that connection. If we're really good, we take the person we have involved more deeply and we say, hey, do you know anybody else who might be a prospect? And that's how we complete the circle, is by taking our current supporters and asking them to help us find new supporters. What you're looking at this slide is the modern theory of fundraising. Everything you need to know theoretically about how fundraising works, here it is. You learned it in 90 seconds. It is not complicated. If we define fundraising as asking, there are many people who will never get there. Which makes me sad. I wish everyone was an asker. I'd like people to be fearless about this. And I think one of the things we're going to talk about in this series is how do we actually sit down with donors, have the conversation, ask them to give. That is coming. But I also accept that not everyone is going to get there. Not everyone is wired to be an asker. Some people won't do it no matter how much training and support they get. And I'm okay with that. Because what I would say is, even if you're not an asker, there are 20 other ways you can help with fundraising. And, we're going to break it down very shortly into what those 20 ways might be. So I have a bias in this conversation, and my bias is this. I don't believe that everyone is an asker, but I do believe that everyone is a fundraiser. And for me, the everyone in that sentence is a board, if you have a board of directors, your volunteers, if you have volunteers, staff members, employees, your donors can help do this. I mean, everybody can have a piece of this. And ultimately, it is a team sport. The more people who are helping, the more money you raise. So take me to the next slide. And I'm going to do like 2 or 3 more slides, and I'm going to pause for questions. I love this. This comes from my friend Tina Sincotti. She's a consultant in Boston, Mass. She took the model and she carved it up by time allocation, like where should we be spending our time? And I think she landed it. I think it's lovely. And what I would have you look at is at the bottom where it says ask, there's this teeny little slice of the pie. It's like 10% of the work. And people are all freaked out about asking. It's not even where the work is. All the work is at the front end where we cultivate people, and at the back end where we appreciate them for their support. And we try and recultivate them and get them to give again. So the part about asking is necessary, but it's not even where the quantity of work is. So I want to show you a couple of slides of what this might look like in reality. And this is very small. Go to the next one. I think we either sent this out to you as a PDF or we will send it out as a follow-up. I cannot remember which we're doing, maybe both. But you'll have it in larger format if you don't yet have it. But I'll describe it briefly. This is from a nature center in Wisconsin. They're called the North Lakeland Discovery Center. I did a training for them like we're doing today, only it was a decade ago. I think it was on Skype because I wasn't able to get out there, so we did it remotely. And I shared with them what I just shared with you. And I said, when I go away, what I want you to figure out how you're going to implement this model. Like if you're going to identify prospects, how are you going to do that? What are the tasks? What are the steps? If you're going to educate and cultivate them, what would you actually do? What are the different ways you could ask for a gift? And they spent an hour sitting around the table and they built this on their own. And I think it's brilliant because this is an entire donor relationship management model that fits on one page. And it's not some 30-page document that a consultant produced for you at great expense that's not usable. I mean, I love it because it's simple and it's basic and it's usable. So here's how they used it. They went to the board and the staff and they presented it. They did a little training like I'm doing today. And they said, here's how we propose to engage our donors better. What are we forgetting? You know, and they made a few adjustments and changes. And then they said to everybody, write your name on the top of the page. Everybody had a copy. And then they said, we're going to have 2 minutes of quiet. And we want you to read this again very carefully and circle 3 tasks on this form that you personally be willing to do. And they were very instructive. They said, don't pick stuff that's awkward or weird that you're not going to follow through on. Like pick things that you think, yeah, I could do that. So there were 2 minutes of quiet. Everybody sat with the form, circled 3 items, turned it in. The staff went back to the office and they built a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet here are all the tasks that need to be done. And here are all the people that volunteer to do them. And where those things crossed, they started to have a model to build everybody into the fundraising program. So for me, this is foundational. I think a really bad question to ask somebody is, will you help with fundraising? Because if you ask me that question, I don't know what that means. Like, what do you actually want me to do? If you could get it down to a level where we have a menu or a list of tasks, then it starts to make sense to me. Like, okay, I could host a house party. I could stuff envelopes. I can invite 3 friends to come to our next event, right? That's tangible, that's specific, that's time limited. It's all that smart stuff, right? So where we're going with this, next slide, is we've sent you, or we'll send you, the blank version of this. This is the template, right? This is the empty. And what I want you to do for homework, next page, and no one's going to collect your homework or grade you. This is just me suggesting a next step. Oh, did we jump ahead? I guess I didn't include that. Oh, well, these are out of sequence. Okay, my bad. Go ahead, one ahead, and then we'll skip ahead and we'll jump back. I apologize. Okay. So go to the next one. Yes. What I want you to do is think about how do we adapt this or build this for our organization. And if it's you working solo, that's fine, but this is really a team exercise. And you could do it on Zoom, right? If you're gathering physically, that's great. You can do it remotely, but like, how do we use this? What's our version of this? So go back one slide and we're going to launch a poll. Based on what I just said, where do you think your organization needs to focus first? Because you can't start everywhere. I mean, you can, but it's not helpful. You do have the all of the above option. If that's what's calling you, I totally respect that. But I would have you think about, where for our organization is the weakest link in this particular chain that we need to strengthen. So go ahead and pop your answer in there, and then we'll look at the results. Rhiannon, are you getting people coming in?
We've got 86% of districts reporting.
Nice, I love it. Let's call victory and show us the results. Yeah, this is good. This is interesting. So let us acknowledge that where a preponderance of groups are falling short is the education and cultivation piece. And what I like about that is it's one of the easiest ones to fix. And what I also like about it, it's one of the least scary things for people to do in fundraising because it's not an ask, right? It's sending people emails. It's inviting them to be on your social media feed. It's bringing them to events when you're able to have events again. Maybe you're doing them now. If you do a newsletter, it's sending them a newsletter. It's that basic communication stuff that I think we all need to be good at. And it may just be inviting them to coffee and having a conversation about what you do. So go ahead and close the poll, please. Love it. So I want to get into another chunk of work here. I would ask my colleagues, if you're seeing anything in chat, any questions you want me to address, this is a good moment to do that.
I see a question from John Glenn about educating and cultivating implies that the asker is talking. Where does need satisfaction discovery occur?
Love it. Thank you, John. Excellent question. What I'm envisioning as part of that conversation is that it's a dialogue and not a monologue. So, I might sit down and have coffee with somebody and say, I'm representing the organization and briefly speaking, this is our mission. Tell me a little about you. How do you connect with this? I mean, are you a veteran? Do you have veterans in the family? What's your history of this work? Maybe you're representing the food bank and you might say, do you have any experience with folks who are food insecure? Do you know people who are not getting fed enough? How's that working for them? How are they trying to solve that problem? Has that ever been you? So, I don't know that this is a cold conversation with a stranger. We'll talk about prospects in a minute. But in my ideal world, John, when we're having these educate and cultivate conversations, it's 1/3 you talking and it's 2/3 the other person talking. So the way I would prepare for those conversations is to think about what questions can I ask that are related to my mission that I can share with somebody to generate information from them that relates to our mission. And you can come with a clipboard if you want. I mean, you can write down notes. It's totally cool to do that. It's like, here's 4 questions I want to ask you that will help me understand how you might connect to our mission. If there's some way you can be involved that would be satisfying for you and would also support our organization. So thank you. It's a great question. Let us proceed. So you got your homework. Let's talk a little bit about where the money is. The good news, people, is that you are a part of a $1.5 trillion industry. And here's where the money comes from. Philanthropy, 450, 500 billion, public funding, government money, 300 to 400 billion. We actually saw a jump in that number recently because of all the federal funds flowing to nonprofits from ARPA and the other federal legislation. Earned income is nonprofits charging for the work they do. That's 600 to 700 billion. Again, collectively, this is like $1.5 trillion. This is 6 or 7 or 8% of the US economy. That's how much we are talking about. And here's a statistic that blew my mind. If we were our own country, if we were the United States of nonprofit organizations, which would be totally cool if it was true, $1.5 trillion would give us the 13th largest economy in the world. That is more money than the economies of Spain or Mexico or Australia. That's what I'm talking about here. And I bring this up because, next slide, please. One of my biggest challenges teaching people this stuff is the concept of scarcity. Oh, there's no money. Oh, everybody's broke. Oh, the economy stinks. Oh, I don't know anyone who has money. And I want to be respectful here, but I also want to say that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if you start with the idea that there's no money out there, you don't raise any money. But if you start with the data and you go, whoa, that's a lot of money, please go back to the previous slide just to underline this. I mean, the way my brain works after doing this for 40 years is I get up in the morning and I look at this. I mean, not literally, but it's in my brain. And I go, damn, how do I get some of that? right? There must be something there for me. So I will be harsh and I apologize, but I'm just going to say this. Whatever your budget is, it is a tiny, 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 tiny fraction of $1.5 trillion. And if you can't make your budget out of this giant bucket of money, again, no offense here, you ain't doing it right. There is not a shortage of money. There's a shortage of time. There's a shortage of courage. There's a shortage of skills. There's a shortage of people to do it. I mean, those are real things. There is not a shortage of money. So what I would ask you all to do on the other end of the Zoom call is like nod your heads and go, yes, Andy, of course, I understand whatever you say. I will follow you, right? And, you know, literally I'm brainwashing you. That's what I'm doing. This is brainwashing, but I'm doing it with factual information. So 2 slides ahead, please. We're going to talk a little bit about the philanthropic piece of this. 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, was a record year for fundraising. I just got a bunch of this giant download of data in terms of where all the money came from. All the categories are up. Small donors are up. Big donors are up. Most sectors were raising more money. Most donors who gave already gave more. The number of new donors, like first-time donors, jumped by about 20% last year in the midst of the pandemic. And the best explanation I have is that people saw the need. The needs were stark. You know, all the inequities and challenges in our society and our culture were on the surface. And people stepped up and they wanted to do something to make it better. And one way they can help is with their dollars. So the distribution is there on the slide. 19% foundations, 3% from corporations and businesses, 69% individuals, 9% is bequests. That's people who've died and left some money behind. The number was a record number. The percentages are pretty typical. And year over year, this is sort of what we see is, you know, I'll generalize here. Most years, 20 to 25% of the money comes from institutional donors. That's the foundations and the businesses and the corporations. The other 75 to 80% comes from individuals, comes from people. And one of the mistakes that people make when they're new to fundraising is they assume it's all coming from businesses and that's all coming from foundations. And what I want to say, go to the next slide, about the individuals is that we're in a situation where more than half of Americans give to charitable organizations. We have seen some erosion of this percentage, though I think last year it probably went back up based on what I said. But I can pretty much guarantee that more than half of the people you know are philanthropists. More than half of the people you know support nonprofits with their money. It is worth noting that poor people, poor households, are twice as philanthropic as wealthy households are as a percentage of their resources. Poor people give twice as much of their earnings and assets compared to the wealthy. Now, if you have access to wealthy philanthropists, God bless, like go for it, right? Most of us don't. That should not inhibit your fundraising. Most of the folks who give tend to spread it around, right? 5 to 10 organizations, most groups that give will give to the veterans group, but they'll also give to the church and they'll also give to the youth program, and maybe they'll give to the environmental group and they'll give to the art group, right? Most people who give tend to not just give to one thing, but they tend to spread it around. And I'm saying this because I want to undermine this concept of competition, this idea that I get $1, you don't get it. Most donors don't think that way. I think there's, as I've shown, enough to go around, and I'm not sure we're fighting over the same people. So I would be wary about perceiving that you're in a competitive arms race with other groups to get the money. Our job is to expand the pie, right? We want to make the pie bigger. I think it was George W. Bush who said he wanted to make the pie higher, which is, you know, not the best way to say it, but yeah, let's expand the pie. And, you know, typical household, when you add up all they give to the church and the veterans group and the youth program and all that, median household giving is about $900 per household per year amongst the givers, which is a pretty good number. I mean, that's not a massive amount of money, but it's pretty good. So message here is that there's plenty of money, it's broadly distributed, and you know some donors. That's the takeaway. Next slide. And I can't follow the chat completely, but I know I'm blowing some of your minds, and that's okay. That's part of my job. Here's my friend Kim Klein. She's one of the gurus of grassroots fundraising. And she says, most people's instinct is to cut expenses rather than raise money. And then she says, resist this impulse as much as possible. And I'm all over this. And if I had you in a room, I would like make you chant this. You would be sitting there saying, resist this impulse as much as possible. And there's a lot of folks, especially if you have board members who are like, cut, cut, cut. We're not making budget. We have to cut things. We have to cut salary, right? We have to cut expenses. And pause. How do we get more money? Like, why can't we actually raise more money rather than cut, cut, cut? So this is a mindset. This is a philosophy. Maybe it's a religion. I don't know, but I'm all with Kim on this. And I think our default button has to be, how do we raise more? And I'll go back to what Travis said at the very beginning of this webinar. More impact equals more money. Maybe it was somebody else. Maybe it wasn't Travis. Forgive me if I'm misremembering, but I'm all over that. And if you guys want to have a bigger impact, you need to generate more revenue in many cases. Should be doable. Should be doable. All right, next slide. You're welcome, Trish. I can see that one. So I'm reminding you, and that's good. Now, let me quickly lay out all your options, because you got options. Nonprofits can get money from a variety of grant sources. And I'm good with you writing grant proposals, and I'm good with you trying to raise grant money. I mean, that makes sense to me. Be aware that most grants are actually restricted money, and the funders are designing to some degree what you can do with that money, which limits your flexibility. So just there's a bit of a trade-off there, but if you want to go after grants, totally support that. Next page. What I'm really focusing on in this series and today is, how do we raise money from the community? How do we raise money from individuals? And there are, as noted here, a lot of ways to do it. I'll put in a plug, and maybe I'll send something for you to send to the group. The one that I'm all over these days is monthly giving, which is people giving you money automatically every month from their bank account or their credit card. And, you know, if you listen, for example, to public radio anywhere in this country, they're doing this all over, right? They're on this. It's really the future of fundraising. And I bring it up because I am doing a webinar on this subject with a colleague of mine in 2 weeks. So I'll send the link out and you can share it with people in case you want to come in and join us. His name is Harvey McKinnon, and he's like the international guru of monthly giving. And I'm excited to be working with him on it. So this is a slide about individuals, and there's one more on your options. Go to the next slide. It is certainly possible to earn revenue, to earn income for charging for things. And I realize that most of you are in the free business, that you're sharing programming for free, and there are times when that's totally appropriate, and I respect that. There are also times when it's appropriate to charge. And you may remember the slide earlier, the biggest bucket of money for charitable organizations is earned income. You know, it's schools charging for tuition, and it's medical centers charging for medical care. And, you know, some people get it for free and some people pay for it. And there's maybe a sliding scale. I mean, there's a lot of ways to think about this. But some of you, maybe not all of you, may be in a position to be thinking about, what are the earned revenue opportunities for our organization? Is there something that we can actually charge for? And if the answer is no, you still have the other two slides to work from. So you've got options either way. Let's go to the next one, please. So this is going to be homework. We're sort of winding down our time today, and we're doing good on time. This is something that's in the deck, and I'm going to show you the quiz, and the answers are included here. If you don't want to cheat, you don't have to cheat. Like, you could do the quiz on your own and then look at the answers later, or you could just study the answers. I'll never know. But go to the next slide, please. These are 10 different tactics, right? Ways to raise money. And they are in a randomized order. And what I'm looking for in the ranking is efficiency. How much money do you get back for the time and money and effort you put in? Like, what's the return on your dollar and your time, the return on investment? And so this is the quiz, right? These are all randomized, and your job would be to rank them 1 through 10, 1 being best, 2 being second best, 3 being third best, et cetera, all the way down the line. The next slide, which we will flash briefly, is the answer key. Ta-da! So the hint here, don't memorize it, go to the next slide. The hint here I'll give you is that the closer you get to the donor, the more money you raise. And I don't necessarily mean physically closer, but I mean in terms of the strength of the relationship, that's what generates higher return on your investment. The overall message here, we're going to get into this in more detail next session, is you got to diversify. You know, any financial investor will tell you the same, any financial advisor will tell you the same thing, is you diversify your portfolio. And that's what we're talking about here, right? Is you want to raise money a variety of sources, because you can raise more money, also because it mitigates risk. And if you're one of those groups that gets like one big grant that's 60% of your budget every year, and that grant goes away, you got a problem. And so we really want to have a variety of sources. This allows us to build multiple legs on the stool. I'm mixing all my metaphors here. But it also protects you if any of those legs comes out from under the stool. So a lot of this series is about diversifying your revenue. That's the whole intention here. All right. Next. Now, not primary work today, but I want to say that this is something that everybody can help with. And one way I know you've got an effective fundraising program is a lot of people are participating in it. So there's work for the board, there's work for staff, there's work for volunteers, there's work for donors, like everybody can have a piece of this. So I want to spend like 2 minutes on systems, and then we'll take a few questions. Go to the next slide, please. And this is like a checklist, right? You need to have these things in place at some point. You can muddle through imperfectly without all of them or without having them in great shape, but these are things you want to strengthen. Next slide. You need a database, right? You got to track relationships. You need to be able to sort your database. You need to be able to know who likes an email, who prefers a phone call, who's in this zip code, who's in that zip code, who has given previously, who has not given yet. When was the last time? All that stuff that databases help you do. You need financial systems. If you are collecting money, you have to be able to put it in the bank and track it and monitor it and protect it. You need recognition systems, right? You need to be able to get those thank you notes and thank you emails and donor recognition events and whatever you're doing in that area. I think it's helpful to track your time and figure out what's working. Because as noted, there's a lot of myths about like what we should be doing for fundraising. There's a lot of lay wisdom that isn't actually correct. So I think it's useful to know the time in, money out equation. And then impact is something that you're all, I think, wired up to think about, which is, are we actually moving the needle on our mission? And how is the money that we're raising affecting that? So I'm going to give you a piece of homework. And this is something I want you to do with your team. Next slide. And this is a thought exercise, and I think it's pretty fun. And this is the what if exercise. What if you had all the money you needed? Like, what if we weren't constrained by money? What would we do? Like, how we spend that money? What impact would we have? Who would we work with? Would we be doing our work differently? Would we expand? Would we think differently? Would we add programs? What would we do? So, you know, this is like 3 versions of the same question. That's what's on the slide. This is the what if. And I find, and you know, back in the day, I was development director for many organizations before I became a consultant, but I used to be the staff fundraiser guy. And once a year, I would sit all the program people in a circle and I would say, what if? Like, if we had more money coming in, what would work for you? What would you do with that money? And sometimes it was external about programming. Some was internal, like we need a better database or we need better desks to sit at, or can I have a longer paid vacation, please? But once I had that brainstorm, it helped me as a fundraiser. It fired me up. And some of those ideas were fundable. And it allowed me as the fundraiser person to think bigger about what we could be doing. And so I think periodically we have to ask this question, like, what if? And I think it actually is a really good spark for your fundraising. So next question, next slide. While you're queuing up your questions in chat, I will remind you again that if you want to stay in touch with me and be on my list, go ahead and put your email address in the chat and we will harvest them at some point and I will add you to my list. And if you want that, that's awesome. If you don't, that's okay too. Any questions I can address here?
I saw a good one in in chat here. I was going to read out.
Please.
Let's see. Danny asks, how can you convince a reluctant board member to help raise funds?
Yeah, great. That's a classic question. So Danny, first of all, the first thing you need to know is the number one request I get as a consultant is, how do I get my board to raise money? So if you're struggling with this, I'll say it 3 times, you are not alone, you are not alone, you are not alone. Everybody struggles with this. My best answer is to go back to that cycle of fundraising and try and come up with a list of tasks, that some of which are easy and some of which are difficult. What I have done with board members that everybody likes, not everybody, most people like, is writing thank you notes, right? It's easy. Anybody can do it. They can sign their name, Joe Smith Joe Smith board member, whatever, Martine Perez board member. And that's a nice entry activity that's comfortable for people who don't think of themselves as fundraisers. I've done mailing parties where I've had board members sitting around writing notes on thank you notes. I've had board members who did social media for me and were just paying attention to social media feeds and putting stuff out. So we have to find tasks that they're comfortable and willing to do. Another question?
Leora had a question. She said, this may be too specific to our program for you to answer, but how do you tap into the individuals when you're part of a public university system where the president controls the ability to reach out to individual donors, and we don't have the autonomy to approach people without approval?
God help us. All right, Leora, that's hard. My best answer, and I'm going to be political here with a small p, is you got to make some friends inside the administration, right? You need some allies that are up in the C-suite who will say, this is an awesome program. This is bringing a lot of props to our university. This is really helpful for us. And that's part one, is the inside game. The outside game is, I want you to try and identify some donors who are not currently giving to the university that you can bring in, who want to fund your program through the university. Because what the university doesn't want to do is, I'll use this bad word, cannibalize its own donors. But if you can bring in some new donors, new money that is designated for you, I don't think they're going to fight you on that. So you got to do the inside game and the outside game. And I think if you do both of those things, you might have some success. And it's hard, so I feel you. Maybe one more.
One more. We've got one from Jennifer. What tracking database do you use or recommend? Is there one all-encompassing, or do we require multiple?
So you should have, in the ideal world, you have one database, right? You don't have one for the mailing list and you don't have one for fundraising. I mean, one data list would be great. Maybe, there's some that can integrate client stuff if you have client activity or participant activity that you need to use. I don't recommend products because I haven't worked in a fundraising office in 25 years. I'm the outside person here. What I would recommend you do is contact 5 groups in your community that you love, and they can be veterans groups or not. I don't think it matters. They just have to be fundraising groups. And call these peer organizations and say, what database do you use? Do you like it? How's the customer service? What are the weaknesses? Can I come and look over your shoulder while you're using it for 20 minutes so I can see if it makes sense to me? And I would have you crowdsource the answer to this question from your peers in your community. And I think that's your best answer to do it. And it'll be super educational, just going around to people and doing little demos of their databases with them. All right, so let's go to the next slide, and we're going to wrap here in just a second. Your homework, I'm giving you lots of homework today, is to think about implementation. And you don't have to put it in chat. If you're moved to put it in chat, that's beautiful, right? We like that. If you want to actually go public and say, this is my next step coming from today, that's brilliant. You don't have to do it, but this is all about the implementation. Next slide is the upcoming webinars. On the 6th, we're going to talk about fundraising planning. On the 13th, we're going to talk about raising bigger gifts from individuals. And on the 18th of November, I'm going to do a little thing on practicing the ask. And there will be role play. I'm warning you now. We're going to put you in teams and we're going to have you practice with each other. So that'll be pretty interesting. So you're welcome to come to all of these. Tell your colleagues from your organizations. I'm sure Bob Woodruff Foundation will continue to promote all of these over the next month and a half. But you are welcome to come back and bring your people with you, because the more people who learn this stuff, the better. 2 more slides from me. I'm the author of many books. This is probably the most relevant book to this. It's called How to Raise 500 to 5,000 from Almost Anyone. And the publisher is listed there. Interestingly, they're selling it for half price for the next couple of days. So if you're at all interested, this is the moment to buy it. You can get a copy of this book for like $12. So it's not a lot of money. And finally, next slide. Here's my contact info. So should you need to find me before the next or after this, here's how you track me down. The websites are there. Let me see. Dee, I'll give it back to you.
Thanks so much, Andy. And I encourage you all to visit his website. I learned that Andy is an avid gardener.
It's true.
By going to his website. Thanks everyone for your time and being so engaged. It was so great to be able to read the chat and see your questions and your comments. I note that Jill just said several of her colleagues joined the session. If your colleagues weren't able to join you, the webinar will be on our website, available to share with your colleagues to return to the information. And as Andy said, we have 3 more sessions coming up. You can register by going under events on our website, or we will be sending out email reminders on how to sign up. And again, just a big thank you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week.